Hello. All right. Simcha mitoch ahava. Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria Zatzal gave a talk to a group of American tourists in Israel just before Yom Yerushalaim. Simchuat Yerushalayim v'gilu ba kol ohoveha. Rejoice with Jerusalem and be happy with it, all those that love it. We do not only have here an invitation that is sent out to those that love Jerusalem. Those people do not have to be invited. They come in and of themselves. Here, the intent is that there should be a love of Jerusalem, and that those that love her should rejoice in her, should rejoice in Jerusalem. Those people that are not within the framework of the lovers of Jerusalem, they are not connected to the happiness of Jerusalem. To have a true rejoicing, one has to love her. And it is not possible to command love. This is an emotion. It's something in the heart. We can command you to put on tefillin. We can command you to keep Shabbos, and so on and so forth. These are physical things you can do. How can we command an emotion? We have to understand this the same way that the Rambam explains the love of God. If a person looks at the great creation that God has done, the deeds of God, in that way he can come to love God. So too it is with the love of Jerusalem. Without learning about Jerusalem, it is impossible to love it. This is understood to us when we are rejoicing, partying about, having a holiday about the liberation of Jerusalem. But we still don't have partners. Only our group, our congregation, has rejoicing over the liberation of Yerushalayim. In Israel, it's a Chag of the national religious. It's not outside of that group. It's not widely felt neither by secular people or by Haredi people. The last Elul, we said that there's a difference between someone that lives in the month of September and someone that lives in the month of Elul. Today, on my way from Kfar HaRoeh was, of course, named for Rav Kook, and that was where the first Yeshiva B'nai Akiva was founded by Rav Neria. One Jew asked me, there is still a lot of time until the 5th of June. He's living in the month of May, and only after that will come June. But we live in the month of Iyar. Reb Tzadok Cohen from Lublin said that Iyar is a bridge month between the time of our freedom and the time of our Torah, because, of course, Shavua is referred to as Matan Torateno, and Pesach is referred to as Zman Cherotenu, the time of our freedom and the time of the giving of our Torah. This is the bridge that has meaning. It's not just a way from getting to one to another, it's an important thing. And that is the month of Iyar. In Tanakh, it's called the month of Ziv, brightness. And in the month of brightness, we have both Yom Ha'atzmaut, the day of independence, and Yom Shichur Yerushalayim, the day of Jerusalem's liberation. To Yom Ha'atzmaut, we have many partners. Independence Day is celebrated by nations all over the world. It's a kosher l'mahadran thing. Vast majority of the state of Israel also celebrates it. But the 28th of Iyar, Yom Shel Koach Masad Higid Le'amo L'Teit Lehem Nachalat Goyim, the day of the power of his deeds, to tell to the nations, to give to them the inheritance of nations. This date, which is taken on the Jewish calendar, you have to count Sfirat HaOmer, and in Omer it's Chesed Shebemalchut, piousness of or kindness of the kingdom. We have to remember Jerusalem 21 times every day. If you go through our tefillot, that's how many times Yerushalayim is mentioned in a day. It's no wonder that the chief of staff at the time when Rav Neria was saying this was Matagur, was the commander of the paratroop brigade that took the old city. He tells in his book, Harabayit B'Yadenu, Temple Mount is in our hands, that at the time he was the commander of the paratroopers and they were supposed to jump into the Sinai, into El Arish. When they were getting ready to get in the helicopters to take them to the Negev for the jump, suddenly the order came that they're going up to Jerusalem. And the brigade was divided into two parts. Those that were angry and those that were happy. There were those that the idea of going up to Jerusalem elevated them. It sparked them in their heart. It grabbed onto them that they were going to fight in Jerusalem. This was the religious youth. But in the time that they were fighting in Jerusalem, which is just 2 days really, also the others began to grab the idea of Jerusalem, began to enlighten them, began to spark them. But in the beginning, most of them were upset about this idea that they had to give up the rare combat jump. Simchu et Yerushalayim v'gilu ba kol ohaveha. Rejoice in Jerusalem and be happy in it, all that love her. Because of the love of her, you have to know her. If you mention Jerusalem 21 times every day, it brings you to a love of her. And someone that does not mention Jerusalem, it doesn't speak to their heart. It has to be something that is deep down in the heart in order for us to reveal the appropriate connection, the appropriate relationship to Jerusalem. Also for us, for the religious world, there has been a change. For 60, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years ago now, who came to Jerusalem were old men and women who came there to have the merit to die there. Right? Originally, there were only old people, or primarily old people, and only that after that did young people join them. In the dust of the war after the conquest, with our fingernails, we grabbed onto Yeshivat HaKotel. And our youth were the first people that went back into the old city to live in it. When the Jewish quarter of the old city began to see hanging out to dry all the time the diapers, this is before paper diapers, when the old city was taken over, there were people that complained that this destroyed their view. The old city doesn't look the same when there are diapers hanging all over the place drying as when you just have the stones to look at. This isn't what they thought life in Jerusalem should be, right? They thought that life in Jerusalem should be stone and old people. That's yesterday's Jerusalem, the day before yesterday, not of today and tomorrow. Jerusalem is not an archaeological museum. We have to fulfill the prophecy that live water will come out of Jerusalem. Look in Zechariah 14:8. When we dedicated the city in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, they said songs and praises at every great large stone that they found, because these stones would be the stones that they built the nation from. The Jewish nation would be built to sanctify the land, sanctify the quarries. And they said that boys and girls will be playing in its streets. A living, active, growing city is what we're looking for. But there is a difference between someone that has seen Jerusalem and someone that has not seen Jerusalem. When we say in the Kedusha, Shachrit and Chag and Shabbat, Titgadel v'titgadesh b'toch Yerushalayim Yercha, that you will be made great and sanctified in Jerusalem, your city. There is a difference between someone that lives in it and someone that doesn't live in it. The Gemara in Sota asks the following question. Darash Rabbi Simlai. Rabbi Simlai asked the question. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu desire so much to enter Eretz Yisrael? Does he need to eat her fruit? Does he need to be satiated by her goodness? By the way, this is, of course, is from the Bracha Achat Min Shalosh, the short grace. Elakach Amar Moshe. But this is what Moshe said. Harbe mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael ve'ein mitkayimim ela be'eretz Yisrael. There are many mitzvot that Bnei Yisrael have been commanded that can only be fulfilled in Eretz Yisrael. Ekanes ani la'aretz kadesh yitkaimu kulan al yadi. I will enter Eretz Yisrael so that I can fulfill all of these mitzvos. In Ksuvos, we have a different Agada. Tana Rabbanan, la'olam yadur adam be'eretz Yisrael, afilu be'ir sheruba ovdei kochavim. A person should always live in Eretz Yisrael, even in a city that is a majority of idol worshippers. The al yadur b'chutz la'aretz. And the person should not live outside of Eretz Yisrael. Afilu be'ir sheruba Yisrael, even the city that is a majority of Israel, majority Jewish. Shekol adar be'eretz Yisrael doma k'mi sheyesh lo Eloah, because anyone that lives in Eretz Yisrael is as if they have a God. V'kol adar b'chutz la'aretz doma k'mi she'ein lo Eloah. And anyone that lives in the chutz la'aretz, it is as if they do not have a God. V'ken b'David, and so too it is with David HaMelech in Psalms. Hu omer, Ki gershuni hayom mistapeach b'nachalat Hashem, because today I have been exiled from the inheritance of God. Lemor lech avod Elohim acherim, go worship other gods. Ki mi amar lo leDavid lech avod Elohim acherim, who told David HaMelech to worship other gods? Elolomar lacha. So what is David HaMelech saying? Kol adar b'chutz la'aretz ki'ilu oved avodat kochavim. Anyone who lives outside of Eretz Yisrael, it is as if he had worshipped idols. So one Gemara says the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to enter Eretz Yisrael was because he could do mitzvahs there that he couldn't do other places. And David HaMelech says in the other Gemara, the reason to be in Eretz Yisrael is because when you're in Eretz Yisrael, you have God, and when you're in the Chutz La'aretz, it is as if you are worshiping an idol. The answer to the contradiction between the Gemorot with Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech is that Moshe Rabbeinu was never in Eretz Yisrael. He did not taste the taste of what it is. He did not have the idea, the rejoicing, the longing. It says, Ki tavo el haaretz, when you come into the land, these mitzvot of Trumot and Maasrot, they're dependent upon being in the land. Shemitah, and so on. On the other hand, David HaMelech, who had lived in Eretz Yisrael, He had felt it. He'd also been in Chutz La'aretz on military campaigns, so he felt both. He understood that it is not the same Chag Pesach, it is not the same Chag Shavuot, certainly not the same Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalaim, as when you're on the Holy Land and when you're someplace else. I've told the story several times about the Rav HaNazir, David Cohen, one of the great Talmidim and later Rosh Yeshiva of Merkaz HaRav. His father was a Rav in Lithuania. His grandfather was the Rav of Rodin. He learned in Volozhin until it was closed. Then he learned in Slobodka, and then he went to learn in Rodin with the Chofetz Chaim. He stayed with his grandfather. It's interesting to note, in the room that he lived in, he had two roommates. One was Rav Neria, who we just learned a little piece from, and the other was Rav Kahneman, later the Rav of Panovich. So you see that it was a very interesting environment to have all these people there. During the Russian Revolution of 1905, which is a failed revolution, he was arrested twice. And this combined with the idea that he wanted to study philosophy, not only Jewish philosophy, inspired him to go to Germany. Before he went to Germany, he went to get a bracha from the Chofetz Chaim for his studies in Germany, for his studies of philosophy. And he spoke for many hours at the Chofetz Chaim. And the Chofetz Chaim, it should be noticed, never sat in a chair. He always sat in the bench without a back. So he had to exercise, keep awake, couldn't relax. And as they spoke, the Chofetz Chaim told him many things. One of the things he said is that when Mashiach comes, who will people ask questions to? Well, they will answer questions to us, the Kohanim. Both the Chofetz Chaim, Yisrael Meir Kagan, of course, Cohen, and David Cohen was a Cohen. So when you are in Germany, you always have to be learning from Seder Kodshim, so that when Mashiach comes, you'll be ready to answer the questions that will be asked. And he said that I am an old man. I will not see the redemption, but you will see at least part of the beginning of the redemption. After this, he made his way to Germany and studied in Germany for a long time, until the outbreak of the First World War, when he was arrested as an enemy alien because he was on a Russian passport. And he was released and arrested several times. Finally, was able to make his way to Basel, Switzerland. Those of you that know Zionist history may know that the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland in 1898. The one that gave the invocation blessing for the first Zionist Congress was the Rav of Basel, Asher Ansel Cohen, another Cohen, and the Rav HaNazir, David Cohen, knowing no one in Basel when he arrived, was tired, worn out. He went to the Rav's house, and the Rav said, right now I'm on my way to a siyum. Come with me, at least you'll have a meal for tonight, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with you after that, what we can do for you. And they went to the siyum. I don't remember whether it was on Zvachim or Menachos, something that, of course, no one learns because it's in Kodshim. And without any warning at all, Rav Asher Ansel Cohen said, we have a visiting Talmud Chacham from Germany with us, and he will speak for the Hadran. And of course, the Nazir had been told by the Chofetz Chaim that he's supposed to learn Kodshim, so he had been learning it for about 10 years already. And as you can imagine, he knew it very, very well. And he got up and gave a 45-minute shiur on connecting, as the minhag is when you make a siyum, the last sugya and the first sugya of the Masechta, and with the ideas of Lishma of the karbanos have to be offered lishma, when the Tanai Beis works, when it doesn't work, and so on, that run throughout the entire Masechta. At the end of the Suda, the Parnas Hatzibor, the head of the Jewish community, Basel, came up to Rabbi David Cohen and said, "We have been looking for a long time for someone that can help our Rav. He's very old. He needs some vacation time, but we haven't found anyone that can paskin shilas and give the shirim for the Rav. Now we found someone. We'd like you to, take this position." He was in that position for a while, not that long. Rav Kook called a meeting. Rav Kook was in Switzerland at the time. He had been traveling to an Aguda meeting in Germany. He had been asked to present his ideas on Zionism that they had many questions about in Aguda. And so Rav Kook was traveling from Eretz Yisrael to Germany for this meeting. When the war broke out, Rav Kook was in Switzerland. He had no interest in continuing to Germany, and he couldn't return to Eretz Yisrael because he had a Russian passport. And so he was stuck in Switzerland. Eventually, he was appointed as the Rav of, I can't remember the shul, in London, where he spent most of the First World War. But at the time, he called a meeting, and as Switzerland being a neutral country, Rabbanim from both the Allies and the Axis could get there. And to deal with the problem of refugees. So very Jewish refugees in the First World War was a huge problem, especially on the Eastern Front. He called a meeting for Rabbanim, and from Basel, they didn't want to send the old Rav, so they sent David Cohen. And he went and he met Rav Kook in St. Gallen, Switzerland. And what is interesting is when they talked in Gemara learning, the Rav Nazir was not impressed by Rav Kook, the only person ever not to be impressed by Rav Kook's learning. And Rav Kook asked him whether he had the place to stay. They didn't have, hotels that the Rabbanim stayed in those days. It was too expensive. They stayed with different balavatim, whatever. And he said, "Not yet." So Rav Kook says, "There's a room under mine that you can stay in." And so the Rav Nazir stayed there. And in the morning, he heard Rav Kook singing the Akedah in Birkas HaShachar. And he could feel in Rav Kook's nigun the longing for Eretz Yisrael. And he would later write, "My life then stood in the balance. I listened to him and was turned into a new man. I had found my Rebbe." At that point, he decided to stop his studies of secular philosophy, although he does cite it a lot in his later writings, and concentrate on Hashkafa, Jewish thought and philosophy. In 1922, he went to Eretz Yisrael, an invitation of Rav Kook to become one of the Ramim in the yeshiva. Rav Kook eventually gave many of his notebooks to the Rav Nazir to edit, and they were edited into Orot HaKodesh. As time goes on, Rav Kook passes away. The Rav Nazir becomes one of the Rosh Yeshiva. Israel's independence is achieved. After Israel's independence, the first major conflict was, of course, the 56 war. The United States was extremely upset with France, Britain, and Israel's conduct and forced Israel to withdraw from the Sinai with a guarantee of freedom of passage through the Straits of Tiran, that there would be United Nations force in the Sinai, and so on. When 67 came, earlier in the year, there were an upgrade in the conflicts with Syria. And about 6 weeks before the 67 war began, the Six-Day War began, some Syrian tanks came down from the Sinai and from the Golan Heights and threatened one of the settlements in the panhandle of Galilee. And an Israeli tank company responded, and in 3 hours of shooting, they didn't manage to hit anything, which shows you the state of the Israeli army at that time. The Israeli army Israeli Armored Corps had had some very serious problems, and there was reworking of it between 64 and 67 to make the gunners and everything else work properly. And as late as a few weeks before the war, it still hadn't clicked. There was an incident a few weeks after that of Syrian planes overflying Israel, 5 of them being shot down, and then the Israelis buzzing Damascus in a victory run. And the tension was growing and growing on the northern front, and this caused Nasser to demand that the UN force be withdrawn from the Sinai, which he assumed would not actually be done, that the UN would refuse to do it. But in a surprise to everyone, Youthon flew to Egypt and just agreed to remove the force. There was an immediately blockade put on the Straits of Tiran, which was, according to Moshe Dayan's diary from this 56 campaign, the cause of the 56 war. And Israel appealed to the powers that had guaranteed her freedom of navigation through it and came up empty-handed. About a week before the war started, King Hussein of Jordan, who had been a great rival with Nasser of Egypt, flew to Egypt and signed a military agreement with Egypt, with Nasser. And at this point, the day after the agreement was signed, the Rav HaNazir said, I didn't understand what all this tumult was about. Something's going on in Syria, so therefore we have to fight a war with Egypt. It just didn't make any sense to me. He said, but now I understand, pointing to the old city. I heard this last Shabbat from Rav Druckman, who lives literally on the road between Jerusalem and the Gaza, or if you want to say the West Bank and the Gaza. And as Israel was preparing, they put their army against the border with Jordan, as if to say, trying to make the Arabs think that the planned attack was against Jordan. On that Shabbat, remember the war started Monday morning, 7 a.m. That Shabbat, as Druckman says, he remembers the entire Israeli army, actually it was 2 of the 3 divisions that fought in the Sinai, went down the road right outside the Yishuv here, going all day long, trucks and tanks and armored personnel carriers and so on, buses, carrying the army to the Gaza. And when the war started, there was no intention to fight against Jordan, but Jordan attacked. Even after it attacked, we sent several messages to Jordan that we had no complaints against them. We had no desire to attack them. But they continued their attacks, and this led to the Israeli move to attack Jerusalem. there was great hesitation, which I wrote about in my notes from last week, about moving into the old city. But in the end, the decision was made to take the old city. Rav Goren, the Rav Nazir's son-in-law, was one of the first Israelis shortly after the first troops to reach the wall. When he was there, he blew the shofar, which is recorded. It can be heard on YouTube, a recording that has his blowing the shofar, and along with several other things. It's that they're not all simultaneously. They're one thing after another. They're woven together, along with Rav Matagur's Harabayit B'Yadenu. The Temple Mount is in their hands. Rav Goren blew the shofar. He said, I, Shlomo Goren, chief rabbi of the Israeli armed forces, have come to this holy place never to leave again. And he, of course, established, when you're at the Kotel and you're facing it, if you look up to your left, there's Yeshiva Idra. Idra means granary in Hebrew, in Aramaic, as Goren means granary in Hebrew. He established his yeshiva there. He then went to pick up, he got a Jeep and picked up Ritzi Yehuda Cook and his father-in-law, the Rav Nazir, to bring them to the Kotel. They arrived at the Kotel the same time as Zalman Shazar, who was the president of the State of Israel, who was a friend of the Rav Nazir's when he was in Germany studying. And he was in Lithuania, I believe. I'm not sure exactly where they were friends. They were friends from there for a long time. And the Rav Nazir, when Zalman Shazar told Rabin, the chief of staff, that he was going to the Kotel, Rabin said it's not safe, it's not secured, there are still snipers, it's too dangerous, you can't go now. Zalman Shazar said, I am an old man. What I have done for the Jewish people, what I can do for the Jewish people, I have already done. But the symbolism of the president of the state being at the Kotel today is one more thing that I can do, that I have to do now. You can tell me to wear a steel helmet. You can tell me to wear a bulletproof vest. You can tell me the route that I'm going to go, but I am going. And they met at the Kotel. Rav Kook went and stood and sang and danced with the soldiers. The Rav Nazir and Zalman Shazar stood a little bit away from the Kotel, as if they were detached. And Zalman Shazar, the president of the state, said to the Rav Nazir, to be here now is a miracle. And the Nazir is reported to have responded by his son that this is the fulfillment of the prophecy of the Chofetz Chaim, that he told me that I would see the beginning of the redemption. When people heard, the soldiers heard that two old men were coming from the new city, they thought that it has to be Mashiach coming. That did not dampen their enthusiasm when they saw Ritzi Yehuda Cook. He was extremely popular with them. There is a song that was better known and is less well known now, written by someone named Yossi Ish Gamzu. Of course, the name Gamzu is the beginning of the state. David Ben-Gurion insisted that people take Hebrew names. instead of the names of the exile. Gamzu is, of course, from Nachum Ish Gamzu, Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe, who would always say Gamzu Latova. This is also for the good, no matter what it was. And there are many stories about it. So apparently, Yossi Ish Gamzu was a younger man, but his father took the name Ish Gamzu. This is also for the good. And he wrote a song about the liberation of the Kotel. The last verse of which was written about Tzvi Yehuda Kook. I will read it. I won't try and sing it. I will read it and translate it for you. Amda nara mul hakotel, svatayim kerva v'santer. A young woman stands before the kotel, lips and forehead close, touching. Amrali, she says to me, Tikiot hashofar chazakot hen, aval hashtika od yoter. She says to me, the blasts of the shofar are strong, but the quietness is more. Amrali, she says to me, Zion, Har Habayit, Zion, Temple Mount. Shatkahali, she is quiet to me, Hagamul v'hazachut, the merit, the reward. Umaj zahar al mitzcha ben arbaim hayha argaman shel malchut. And what shined on his forehead in the afternoon was the purple of kingship. The refrain to the song, Hakotel azu ve'atzevet, the kotel abandoned and alone. Hakotel oferet bedam, the kotel lead and blood. Yesh anashim im lev shel eben, there are people with a heart of stone. Yesh avanim im lev adam, there are stones with the heart of man. This last part is a paraphrase of a poem Tzvi Yehuda Kook wrote in the 19 years that the kotel was in Jordanian hands. Amad hatzanchan mul hakotel, the paratrooper stands before the wall. Mikol machlakto rak echad, from his entire platoon, only one. The losses that the paratroopers took in going through the north part of Jerusalem were phenomenal, very, very high. Amarli, he said to me, L'mavet en dmut ach yesh koter, tisha millimeter bilvad. Death does not have an image, but it has a caliber of 9 millimeters alone. Amarli eneni domea, he said, I will not cry. Vashav lahashpil mabatim, and he goes and he glances here and there. Ach saba shali Elokim hayodea, but my grandfather, God knows, Kabur Khan Bahar Hazetim, is buried here on the Mount of Olives. And then the refrain. Amda b'shchorim mul hakotel, she stands in black opposite the wall. Imo shel achad me'achir, the mother of one of the chir. Chir is a Rosh Tevet for chel regel, foot soldiers. Amrali, she says to me, Eini na'ari hadokolten v'lo hanerot shebekir, the eyes of my boy are lit, and not the candles in the wall. Amrali, she says to me, Eineni roshemet shum petek litmon b'stakav, I will not write any note to put between its stones and its cracks. Kimash natati lakotel rak emesh gedol mimilim michtav, because what I gave to the wall last night is greater than words and writing. Again, the refrain. Amad mul hakotel imanu, he stood opposite the wall with us. Harav hayashish b'tfilah, the old rabbi in his prayer. Amarli, he said to me, Ashrei shezachinu kulanu, happy are we that we all merited it. V'shav v'nizkar lo chulam, and he went back and he remembered not all of them. Amad b'dmimah minatznatzet, he stands in great tears. Yachid ben Asrot Toraim, one among tens of privates. Amarli, he said to me, mitachat lahaki be'etzem, under the khaki, in truth, kulchem kohanim ulevim, all of you are priests and Levites doing the service in the temple. This idea that is expressed here from Rabbi Rue of that the uniform is clay sharet, is the vessels that the Kohanim used to serve in the temple. What occurred, he expressed this idea several times. When Rav Shari Yishuv Cohen, the son of the Rabbi Nazir, got married, he had been appointed by his brother-in-law, Rav Goren, who at the time was the chief rabbi of the army, very early days of the state, as chief rabbi of the Air Force. And when he was married in Yerushalayim, he wore his army uniform, Air Force uniform. And someone came up to Rav Tzvi Yehuda, one of the Haredim, came up to Rav Tzvi Yehuda at the wedding and said, in Yerushalayim, it is the tradition to wear, traditional garments, a bekasher, a gartel, a strimal for the chatan, to wear these things at his wedding. And Rav Tzvi Yehuda said, Al kedushat strimal yeshli lefaktek. One can have questions about the sanctity of the strimal, but the army uniform is clay sharet, is the vessels that the Kohanim use to serve in the temple. Another time, when one of his Talmidim got engaged and the wedding seemed to be delayed longer than normal, Tzvi Yehuda asked what was going on, and he said, he can't afford to buy a new suit for the wedding, so until he can, they're putting off the wedding. And Tzvi Yehuda said, no, you shouldn't put off the wedding, that you should wear your dress uniform to the wedding, because your army dress uniform is the clay sharet, is the way the Kohanim, special clothing that the Kohanim had to wear to serve in the temple. It's interesting to note, it says that the tzaddikim, the Gemara says when the tzaddikim arrived in Eretz Yisrael, they would roll in the dirt. And what people wear to roll in the dirt more often than anything else is an army uniform. So there's something special about that. There's also something special about the way Tzvi Yehuda, his father's heir, related to everyone. People felt, no matter where they were from, he stood with them, and he stands with the ordinary people. The way the poet says it, he stands among the privates, among the corporals. He doesn't stand with the generals. There were plenty of generals also there. The difference, it's an interesting difference. He's in among the people. The Rav HaNazir is a Nazir. In many ways, he has a special priesthood. He stands for the president of the state. There are different approaches to Avodat Hashem that are reflected in these two people that were very close, very good friends, in many ways like brothers. And on the other hand, when they're faced with the same event, they react to it in very, very different ways. One stands with the people, one stands apart from them. All right, I wish everyone a very happy Yom Yerushalaim.